Good morning. Again, my name is Mary Gomez-Kokkinos. I'm the Assistant Director for School Operations. Today, my part of this presentation is really to kind of go over some procurement basics and understanding how that applies to compliance. In the question that in some of the questions that we were presented with, we felt like it was a good indication of providing some really basic compliance and procurement information. So I'll briefly go over that, and then we will open the floor for questions after Anwar's presentation. So we want to make sure that we're capturing everything that you have questions on. You know, I told Wendy earlier, I said, we like to provide as much clarification on questions as possible. But sometimes what we don't know changes a particular regulation or understanding of how something was procured. And so what we ask is, if there's information that is you're not clear about, we ask that you reach out to TDA. We have a mailbox specifically for procurement, and we have a school operations mailbox that we as a team work together to help answer those questions. And so we really encourage that a complete question come through those mailboxes, and that is a resource for you. We will provide as much clarification as possible and provide you in what direction in the ARM that information is provided, or citation that it incurs. So I just really would like to make sure that we're understanding that as we go through some of the questions that we're going to answer for you. So the first thing we just want to, again, just kind of preface this by saying we really appreciate you coming and having questions, and we want to ensure that we understand your questions to provide you the best answer. But there is a wealth of information available on our squaremeals.org. How many of you have been there or lived there or have breathed that way, the ARM? Yes. And so you're probably going to be very familiar with Section 16 and Section 17. Those deal specifically with the financial and procurement sections of the ARM. And since this is all really what we're talking about, we want to, make sure that you have those references. So the first thing we'd like to just ensure is, what are the key concepts when we talk about procurement? And one of the questions that was brought to us was, what are the thresholds? How do you make a determination on simplified acquisition threshold? And really, the first place that you would understand that is through your local procurement procedures and ensuring that they are more restrictive than our state thresholds. Who can tell me what our simplified acquisition threshold is? Yes, ma'am. Yes. Right. Okay, so let me clarify that. So that's great. So when we're talking about procurement regulations, everything is tied back to the nonprofit food service account. Those are federal funds. They come from a grant, and you need to ensure that they are meeting the regulations for utilizing them. And so when we talk about the simplified acquisition threshold, in the state of Texas, they have deemed that 49,999.99 is the threshold for a simplified acquisition threshold. Anything past that requires a formal procurement. And what is formal procurement? We'll go through that in just a minute. But really, it is everything that's required in procurement. So things like going out and publishing your bid, your evaluation criteria, how you build your criteria, how you build your specifications, ensuring that all of the provisions are included in the formal procurement, and understanding that full and open competition has occurred in every step of the process. So we talk about written procurement procedures for child nutrition purchases. Now, that's really key because oftentimes people misunderstand that we're saying you have to have a separate procurement procedures for child nutrition. We don't say that. What we say is that it must be identifiable for the federal funds because oftentimes procurement procedures have been developed by a procurement specialist for within your district who typically use Edgar. Yeah. And so there's a few differences when we talk about Edgar and those federal procurement regulations. And so those need to be captured in your procedures. And what we always say is you've got to evaluate your local procurement procedures. Best practice would be to be done annually because you're allowing whoever is in your district to utilize and understand procurement when they have to follow these procedures. And so it's really important that anybody who looks at those procedures have a really good understanding. Well, what is our simplified acquisition? Is it $49,999 or is it less? And it can be less. It may be mandated by your district that it's less, but that's a local decision. And so it's really taking the time to understand what is it in our district that we need to ensure that we're capturing to cover those procedures. And we'll also talk about purchasing threshold and then the full and open competition and the compliance purchasing mindset. So the first one is that we want to ensure that when you talk about procurement, again, we're talking about federal funds. And you may have an opportunity to understand better about the procurement regulations if you have already reviewed some of that in the ARM. But what we really want to help you understand today is that when we say federal funds, you want to make sure that you're doing everything that you know to ensure that you're covering the information. And what I mean by that is that sometimes CEs will go out and procure for an item and they're buying it based on their understanding of their local procedures. However, the local procedures haven't necessarily taken the time to determine if these have been updated to ensure that the federal regulations are met. And let's just say you're purchasing off something that is from a group purchasing organization. And you're encouraged to do that. But at the same time, you still want to ensure that that group purchasing organization is meeting the federal procurement regulations. And oftentimes, if you look at different websites of those organizations, they will tell you that the federal regulations aren't necessarily, it is a responsibility of the district to adhere to those regulations. So in other words, they're saying, district, yes, we do follow procurement regulations. This as part of our process, but you as a district have to ensure that it meets all of the federal regulations. So I encourage you, if that's something that you do, to verify that through your organizations. And that should, as you think through your process, be part of something that you develop for your procurement regulations, because it is something that we see often in terms of the procurement review. And, when we're asking about, well, how did you procure for this item or this service, oftentimes RCEs can't give us that information. And we are looking to you to tell us what procurement method was utilized. And so the procedures should really be your guiding source of how you procure for any goods and services. And so the documents that you do want to maintain for that is always going to be all of the procurement history that happens with procurement. So whether using small or formal, you want to ensure that you have either a log or emails or information that says, yes, I went out for quotes and this is the documentation that I have for small, or we went out for formal procurement. Here's my advertisement. Here is the solicitation. Here is the responses from the vendors. And this is sign-in sheets, agendas, and how we evaluated that procurement and how we awarded. So all of those things have to be kept. And again, it should really be indicated in your procurement procedures so that if you or someone else leaves the district, there is a clear record of where things have been kept and who is managing. Now, is really looking at the positions that people will hold so that they can continue to manage, or that position continues to manage those records. I will tell you from a lot of experience, we have had CEs who, or districts, tell us, I'm new to my role. The previous person kept all those records and we have no documentation. And that really is unfortunate because what ends up happening without any documentation, we see that as that item has not been procured competitively. And when it has not been procured competitively, it's subject to fiscal action and repayment to the Child Nutrition Fund or the nonprofit food service account. So we really encourage, as part of your procurement procedures, indicate where those records are going to be maintained, who's in charge of them, what's happening with it. Because when you are reviewed by our team, they're going to ask that question. Okay. Concept 2, annual thresholds. Am I using the correct procurement purchase for this, or this method for this purchase? Again, that's really going to derive from your procurement procedures and understanding what it is or how it is you're indicating what you need. If you understand that you are needing, from a cost analysis perception or forecasting, that you are going to have to purchase multiple items, and the dollar value is going to exceed that threshold, whatever threshold you're using, then you need to consider that. But I would also challenge you to understand that the threshold is one indication of how you begin that process of procurement, because there are other items within procurement that you want to ensure that you're following. For example, micro purchases. Micro purchases, oftentimes we hear, oh, well, it was under $10,000, so we're good. And what the next question is, okay, it was, how did you make a determination that this was the method you wanted to use? And it's, well, it's under 10,000, it's $8,000. Right. But the $8,000 is just one area of what we're talking about when we talk about thresholds. You also have to ensure, based on regulations, that it is equitably distributed and that the cost is reasonable. In addition, you want to ensure that typically it's a non-routine item that you're utilizing for micro purchase. And so it's something that you continuously purchase. You want to consider what method you're using to ensure that you're getting the greatest economical value for that item. It's not, again, just simply based on the threshold, but it is a good start to the understanding what or how you will procure for that item. Should I obtain a quote? The last 2 years, I spent about $18,000 for the same product. So what does that tell you initially when you read that? Is it the same product? I don't know. It could, yeah, it could be. And so you might determine, you're forecasting a year out for your budget, right? And you're going to know that you have different items you have to purchase for the following year. So you're going to look at your general ledger, you're going to look at your previous expenses, and you're going to make a determination. This is what I spent last time on, let's just say, pots and pans. This is what I spent, and I know I'm going to need to replace those items, and those items are going to cost me, because costs have increased, probably $25,000 now. And so you'll make that determination based on a very informal way of cost analysis of how much you need to spend for that threshold. Now, when we talk about formal procurement, you have to do a cost analysis, because you have to ensure that you understand that cost is reasonable, and it's a requirement for formal procurement. So even though it may not be for micro and small, you want to ensure you have some indication of how much money you will spend, so that you have an idea how are you ensure that you're meeting that threshold and that you don't exceed that threshold. So in case you determine, well, I ended up spending $80,000, then you're exceeding the threshold for probably that small procurement, and it should have been a formal type of procurement. So it's really important to have thought through that process. And this was actually a question that came through, is maybe I could make 3 separate purchases and make sure I only buy enough product to keep each single invoice at around $6,000, and purchase from 2 separate vendors, and classify 3 purchases as micro, and the way I'm not required to obtain 2 or more quotes. We have to be really careful about this, because you don't want to circumvent the process. Okay, that is a big no-no. We say, you know, if you've done your analysis and you determine that you need to spend this much money for this type of good or service, what is the most appropriate method to utilize? And if you find that it is formal, then you go through that process. But what happens if you've done all of that and you still exceed it? Well, there may be times when you have to use other types of methods to supplement, because things have occurred, and you know, maybe the cost analysis did not go as planned, or it actually exceeded it because of rising costs, or whatever that might be. You can use other methods, but the important thing is in being able to maintain the documentation and ensure that you can speak to those other methods when utilized. And so oftentimes what we hear is someone has done the process of a formal procurement, but and they utilize that RFP, but then their equipment, something breaks down, and they have to go out for an emergency procurement. Those things are allowable. You just got to make sure that you go through TDA to get an emergency procurement approval. Now, it doesn't have to be necessarily right then and there. We ask that as soon as you find out, you provide us that information so we could approve it. The approval is to utilize federal funds without procurement. So I want to be clear on that, is that is what we're asking, is that you're coming to us and saying, this broke down, I need to get this fixed. We're not saying you have to wait to get that fixed. What we're saying is, get it fixed, send it to us so that you can pay that invoice with federal funds. Okay. Key 3, full and open competition. Am I favoring one vendor in this purchase? So that's going to be really key to understanding your own procurement policies. If you find that in your procurement procedures or policies with the district, you're only allowed to use approved vendors, the question is, how does someone who's not an approved vendor able to bid on this information, or this bid, this proposal? Or is you know, are you having restrictions placed on the type of vendor, or a type of relationship you might be having with that particular vendor? For example, we often see that vendors who have a prior history, or are allowed to bid, and others who do not have a prior history are not. And so that's not free and open competition. So it's really important to understand and think through that process as you're procuring for any of those goods and services. And if I make this purchase, will it be an issue during a procurement review? Anytime there's no documentation, anytime that you as the district cannot provide us additional resources or understanding of how you procured this history, or there appears to be there appears that there's not full and open competition, it will be an issue in your procurement review. So it's really important to have a good understanding of those regulations prior. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but our procurement review reviews the prior year. So if you're on a schedule for next year, you really want to make sure what you're procuring in the previous year is done correctly. And last but not least, planning your purchases and annual totals to forecasting to ensure the correct purchase method is used. Again, this is all about the forecasting and understanding your local procedures, and your state procedures as well. When we talk about budget totals, those are indications of how you should utilize the data that is available to you to help forecast for your next year. You want to ensure that you're looking at menus in case there are any issues when it comes to food. How many people are in a cooperative? Okay, so your cooperative will ask you, please conduct a cost analysis of your food that you will need for next year, and you've got to have menus in order to do that, so that you can ensure that you're getting those products that you're requiring. And then changes to menu or substitutions is really going to be based on what is the contract state for the cooperative. What does it state? What is going to constitute a material change? Because often what we're seeing is, the items are not purchased according to what the bid was developed. And so it becomes items purchased outside of that procurement RFP. And so then the question is, well, how much change was there? And does it constitute a material change according to this contract? And so those are things we ask when we do a procurement review. And I think that's the last one. Yep. So if you'll hold your questions until after Anwar is completed, and we'll ask for those questions.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Anwar Sophy. I'm the Administrator for Business Management with TDA. I oversee the financial and procurement and contract operation for the 12 nutrition programs. I'm really happy to be here with you guys today. I hope that you have the same feelings because capital expenditures are always a tough topic, or not tough as much as it has an area of ambiguity sometimes. So today I'm gonna sort of like walk you through what is capital expenditures, what's the process for it, and I received some questions from Carrie. I'm gonna sort of like answer some of them on the slides, and after that, if you have any more, I'm happy to respond to them. So first thing I would like you to understand that there is different concept between what is capital asset and the capital expenditures. So those normally identified and defined in the 2 CFR 200-409. So the capital asset is any tangible property that has a useful life for more than 1 year. And that's how it was also identified or capitalized according to the generally accounting principle, the guide. So when you maintain, modify, do any kind of maintenance for that capital asset, you acquire the capital expenditure. But when do you define it as a capital expenditure? So when can you call it a capital expenditure? If it exceeds $5,000. So if the capital item more than $5,000 equal or greater than $5,000, then you can call it a capital asset, and any expense maintaining or any expense that touched that asset exceed or equal to $5,000, that's a capital expenditure. Anything below that dollar threshold, you cannot call it a capital expenditure. That's why you didn't need to send us a request. So for example, if you're buying a laptop is going to be from like, $1,200 to $2,500 each, because we're talking about one single item that exceeds $5,000, not the aggregated cost. So you're buying a laptop, $1,500. Is that a capital item? It's not. Maybe in your school side, if you're dealing with business operations, when they capitalize stuff, they consider the hardware and software, the aggregated cost as a capital item. That's different. But for us, in order for you to get approval for it, it has to exceed $5,000 per item, not the aggregated cost. If you're maintaining that capital item, like you have an oven, and you have to spend like $500 or $1,000 maintaining it for any reason, that's not a capital expense. That's a non-capital expense. And always like think about, because a lot of situations people say like, why we cannot use the child nutrition food to do XYZ. Like, you can use the child nutrition food to maintain it. Because if you have any exposure to how your school allocate and handle the funds, there is always an indirect cost charged to the child nutrition program. This indirect cost includes maintenance, travel, all miscellaneous that the school has to spend to operate the program. So if an item is not qualified on our side to be handled by the child nutrition program food directly, because there is item that has direct cost and item that has indirect cost. We only approve the one that has direct cost, because once you get our approval, you're not going to use the indirect cost for the child nutrition food to cover it. You're going to use direct child nutrition funds. Okay? So, so I identified the capital asset. I'm going to explain the capital expenditure request process. So if we go to the next slide, Sarah, please. So click one more, two more. Okay, so that's just an example. The hardware, software, computer network, if it exceeded that threshold, the $5,000, because you can get a customized laptop for certain function that it needs to be, like, for example, it has like a very sophisticated graphic design card. Those laptops will get like $5,000, $7,000. That's a capital item. Again, that's the direct expense that aligns to it. Next slide. Let's go to the next one. So when you identify that that's okay, now I know that I have a capital item or I have a capital expense. What do? You go to the square meal, you get the tax information, the item, the expense item, and it's gonna require some attachments. A lot of people got confused a little bit about what attach. Do we attach quote, 2, 3? We'll get to that. So if you move to the next slide, I just want to highlight certain points just to make sure that when you send your CR, it gets approved right away. We don't have to go back and forth asking for more information. Because sometimes if you see the item location, which that's the school site, the site that this item going to, the type of the item, the age of the equipment, the quantity per cost per item, then the total cost. Sometimes we get requests where we have one site, they put one site, and they're asking for like 10 or 15 ovens. So like, why one site will have 15 ovens? So it was like, it makes us like, because we know that this is actually, they probably didn't put the rest of the sites. So we called them and then instructed my staff, and instead of denying the request, because it makes it harder for you to put a new one, just send it back for correction. So all what you need to do, just add the site, and then when you send it back, we'll review and approve. There are a lot of items that easy identified. If you're buying any kind of kitchen equipment, replacing those, it's clear cut. We don't do much with it other than just look at the item, the cost, and after that, if there is any kind of justification, great, we'll approve and send it back to you. It gets a little bit tricky when, number one, if the item cost is too significant. Like you can tell sometimes that there is serving lines that starts from $80,000 to $400,000, right? But the one that they call normally the serving line will cost from 80 to 120, right? So when we get a request, somebody's asking for a serving line was $400,000. Like, what's in the serving line? Why it's so high? So that's where the justification box, it's so helpful that says comments to CE comments. It's very helpful to understand when you have an item that it's out of the ordinary expensive. Even like, for example, walk-in coolers. The walk-in cooler was like, $200,000. That one, it's 1.5 million. When we get to those particular items that the cost is significant, we're very careful because we don't want to, in the end of the day, if we said, let's say we approved it. It got to you and you bought it and everything, and we got federal audit, which we had 3 of them this year. We were so blessed. We got 1 finalized, we're still 2 going on. So they will go on site and they ask for documentation, and once they review that, because sometimes the serving line, some people include costs in it that it's not allowable. Like, for example, they send an RFP and they said, we want a serving line and then want to change the HVAC with it and want to put like fire system and want to put like, plumbing outside. So all those are not allowable costs. And that particular situation I'm talking about, because those particular situations where it has unallowable costs, it's so tricky. That's why we talk about it internally. Then we communicate with you more to get better understanding for it. So to make sure we're making the best decision for you. In the end of the day, we're helping you to not get in any problems, because TDA, if you know, the Food and Nutrition Program, it's 99.9% federally funded. We have $4.1 billion budget, around $300,000, that's the state general revenue, if you're familiar with finance a little bit. So when we get a finding from the federal government and they say, you owe us $2 or $3 million, that's a big problem, because we can't pay them from their own money. It's like, that's what my kids do with me. they take my money, they buy stuff, and they broke it, and then I tell them, like, you broke my stuff. It's like, well, give us money back to buy a new one. It's like, well, you owe me $5. Like, no, yeah, okay, I'll pay you $5. It's like, sure, well, what it is? It's like, give me $5 so I can give it back to you. They're a little bit too smart for under good. But I always tell them, if you're smart, I am way smarter. So that's when it makes an issue for us. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to go back to you and we ask for the money back, because you took the money, usually asking us to pay him back. We're going to ask us to pay us back. That's the situation we're trying to avoid. So don't take it that when we deny something that we want to hold you back. Believe me, we are on your side. We want you to do everything possible that you need to use the funds for, because in the end of the day, we want to maximize the federal funds utilization, because any money left over, we're sending it back. So it doesn't benefit us. And USDA actually encouraging us to work with you as much as possible to expend the funds. But they have a big gun. When we don't spend the fund the right way, it creates a problem, to the point that they can suspend the next allotment. So if I owe them money for this year or from previous year and we haven't paid it yet, we do not get the allotment for the next quarter until we pay that. We have to clear that first, which means that we cannot pay claims. We pay around $250 million claim a month. So any delays, it hits the schools really hard. And we feel that. We don't want you to not have any funds for your schools. So just when you don't have any, like, if you have any questions or you don't know what to do with the process, or when you send it, call us, and we're going to be working with you. I receive a lot of emails from CEs asking about, okay, we want to do this, but we don't know if it's going to be approved or not. I was like, sure, I'll send them the guidance, the reference, and the ESC also very helpful. You can reach out to them. They're knowledgeable. We work with them a lot. So you will find an answer through one of us. Next slide, please. So records and documentation. If it's informal procurement, which is like the micro purchases, and if you know this, we allowed the self-certification to increase the micro purchase from $10,000 to $50,000. So that was great because previously the agency wasn't allowing that. And when I started, we come up with a process to make sure that we have enough data to allow the self-certification to release some of the pain with the procurement. Because I do procurement myself in our office for the operation of food and nutrition, and it's not easy, especially when you have a vendor that the contract expiring next month, you don't know what to do. You're gonna have to get a new procurement out, and that's gonna take 6 months or at least 3 months. And what are you gonna do in the gap? I'm actually have like 4 issues currently like that with some of our contracts. So I do know your pain. So work with me. If you have any issues in the procurement with the timeline and you can't get it done, call me. We can chat and we can find a solution. We can problem solve that. Yeah.
Is there a timeline on moving on? We're going to certain period.
So for which one?
For the increase in the amount of micropurchases.
I mean, because that's the federal regulation. The federal regulation says below $50,000.
Yeah, but it was only like so many months. I was just asking.
Because
I was just asking our ESC person. Deadline. I still can't tell you what
October 1st.
Our district's mail is.
To increase the micro purchase threshold.
Yes. So the timeline was, because here is the thing. I'll be honest with you. We have a lot of work. We have seasons. Like, so during the beginning of the school year and toward close to the end, we receive around 200 CRs a week. And I only have one more staff or two that they handle this process with me. We have the FSMC season, we have the IFP season. So it's a lot of, if we're not going to be organized in terms of like, put certain timeline for everything, we're not going to get anything done. And at the end of the day, you will be delayed. But hey, we can flex that a little bit, add more timeline to it, and we'll do a better job in announcing that. We'll communicate more with you. The process this year was new to us, so we learned a lot, and we can have better process next year. So we'll flex that.
So how do you guys come up with the allotted amount? Like you mentioned, the walk-in or the line that typically they're between this and this. Where do you guys get that information to create that?
So we look at historical data. So I personally look at data since 2003. We have data. The cost, how much the other schools asked for.
Okay.
And we get an average for that. And we look mostly to the recent years to see if the cost fluctuated and how much fluctuated by. So I can get an estimate.
So because we've had some research, I come from the manufacturer side of things.
Right.
So there's been a lot of price increases because of the supply chain.
Right.
Do you guys take that kind of stuff into account?
We do, and we ourselves provided the CPI increase for certain vendors with us, because we know that, but that was more last year and year before because the inflation cost was significant.
Would that be a good piece of information to put in the comments if you knew that vendor had a price increase?
So
Would that help you
there is a
guys?
question regarding that. I'm gonna get to it, and I'll give you a little bit better information. So for the documentation piece, if you're buying something with the informal procurement, which is micro purchases or small purchases, you can just explain it in the justification box and send us one quote. And the one quote more to protect you also, because if you have the person that did this procurement and he or she's gone, when we have a federal audit, we can provide this documentation on our end. When they say, okay, they bought this, how did you know that was valid? How did you know that they got quotes? Like, well, they sent us one. That's the final one that they bought, and this is just justification. So we, on our side, we explain that as well. If you have a procurement, RFP went out, or RFI or RFO, you can just attach the documentation, the document of the RFP, and one quote, the final quote that you said, like, this is the best quote, this is the best price, and this is what we're moving forward with. Those are enough. So at first, we asked for a little bit more, like 3 quotes and stuff, because we were in the middle of audit, and USDA was a little bit strict with us, but we did have a conversation. In fact, I was in DC yesterday, and we had a really good talk with them about multiple topics, including the capital expenditures process. So we're also flexing that for you a little bit. We're gonna make it more simplified, and we are right now. We're gonna add more resources to the website where you can. There is a document we call it decision tree. So this basically will take you. Okay, are you buying this? Okay, is it how much the cost? Is it exceeding that? So it will take you to the next step until it shows you, like, you need to send a CR, you don't need to send a CR. Yeah, this would be allowable cost directly, or this needs more documentation and information, considering that it's a little bit more involved, right? So we have draft of those processes. I'm gonna be reviewing them next week, hopefully, and we'll be posting them on the website pretty soon, so you can have more resources to look at. We're also going to put a Q&A. So all the questions that I answered today or will be answering, we're going to take notes of those. We're going to add them to the Q&A document, and we'll post it online so you can have this as a living document. So for the documentation, just the RFP and one quote, they're sufficient. But please, when you send a CR that's a little bit more involved and the dollar figure high, put a good justification, and don't just put it was approved in the net access funds plan, because in the end of the day, we'll tell you the net access funds plan approval, it doesn't mean approving the capital expense. It only approves your plan, how we're going to spend that. But the capital expenditure side comes to my team to decide if it's going to be approved or not. And we are working together, like Mary and I have been trying to work in a way where when we receive those net access funds plan, we also look at them. But this year, the number of access funds plan documents were like over 500, and the timeline was so quick. So we don't want to delay you, and we did not have enough time to establish this process this year. But hopefully next year we'll be able to do that. Kitchen equipment replacement. Just remember, it's replacements. So if you have a new kitchen, look at the arm, because we cannot furnish a new kitchen for you. That's part of the eligibility at first. If you don't have an operational kitchen, you cannot operate the program. So, but if you're adding equipment to the kitchen, we can pay for that. So, and this is spelled very well in the ARM section 16. Look at it. If you have any questions about it or any confusion, always feel free to call me and my staff, and I will help you out. Food trucks. Generally, go ahead. Yeah.
Going back to that, what about if, like, for instance, it's a bond project and you're approached by your district and say, I'd like you to contribute X percent, 20%.
So,
because you're about to go into excessive
right.
Plan or something like that.
So for the bond project, that's when it gets a little bit complicated. Normally, because the way we look at it, you already have the funds for it, and the district approved the bond funds to be spent to do this project. So in this instance, you cannot be supplanting your funds with the food and nutrition funds. In the meantime, bond project normally for new stuff, new kitchens. So if it's a new kitchen, we can support it. Maybe after you build it, the year after, if you want to add more equipment to it, that would be something we will be more willing to work with you on.
So if this kitchen is being renovated, and they pass a bond, can we use service fund because there's a kitchen there for renovation?
So if you look at the ARM Section 16, when it comes to renovation, and that's going to be specifically on 2 CFR 200-409. That's gonna explain what's renovation means, because renovation, we're talking about limited renovation to the existing kitchen, and it has to have certain impact on the food and nutrition program. In the meantime, it has to be 100% benefiting the program. So if the renovation benefiting the building in general, that it comes to a capital project that increase the value and the lifespan of the building, right? So at this point, it won't be allowed. But when it comes to that, again, I would say, like, just call us, let's talk about it, because USDA provide certain guidance about that. They're very like black and white at this point, but they give us some more flexibility in terms of the discussing more stuff with them. Good. Yes, I mean this equipment, you have it. If you want to reuse it for something else, that's fine, because the original fund was paid to replace those equipment to operate the program. So you're using it also to operate the program. You're not using them unless the project is for site that is not participating in the CMP program. That's different. Yeah. Okay, I mean, I don't see why not, but what I can tell you, that's because here's how it's going to be used. I'm going to build a new kitchen. I'm going to take all the equipment from this kitchen, put in there. I'm going to ask for replacement. That won't work. I can tell you. Yeah. So when you are you on this project right now? Are you okay, let's send me an email with the details, and they'll talk about it with you. I can consult with USDA to see their feedback and input. And if it works, we'll work with you. We'll get it done.
For example, we get the architect, we get the consultant, draw up the kitchen.
Yeah.
Say the first having it open, and then we're going to use something existing. But if you want to keep water cooler or vent or the next, we get the drawing, tell you, hey, this is what we want to get paid for, and then the district obviously building, they can approve it. That will provide the district. That way everybody's covered.
Yes, so we will pay for the architect design cost, if that's what you're asking about.
Yeah, no, the district is going to pay all that.
Yeah.
But we're going to determine what equipment that we can pay for the renovation.
Right.
Like we have an old building.
Yes, so if you're adding a walk-in cooler, yes, we'll pay for that. Yes, that's an allowable expense.
In order to make sure everything's good for an AR and all that kind of stuff, that we send you the drawings. This is what we want. You say, okay, that makes sense.
That would be very helpful, considering like we need to know if the walk-in cooler is going to be on an existing site that it's approved and operating the program, or it's going to be on a different campus that doesn't have any relation to the kitchen. You know, so these kind of stuff, it helps. Yeah.
They're going to pay for some bigger stuff, and then probably less. So anything that we will have to pay for you,
Right.
5,000.
Right. So we will pay for the walk-in cooler, but we won't pay for the housing for it. So if you're building like a building to put the walk-in cooler inside, because some districts do that, that's different. So
but that would be in the email. Say his doc.
Yes. Yeah. You can do it either way, because if you send it via the TXMPS, there is a very possible that we're gonna call you. It's like, okay, what's going on in this? Because usually those projects cost a lot. And usually when we have costs in the millions, we would like to make sure we understand what's going on.
That is probably better on email, because the timeline is well past this current year.
Right.
So if you get the approval, then we go back and say.
Yeah. We feel free to do that as well. Yes. Next, I think let's go to the Q&A. Those are the resources online. You can go to the website and the NSLP. Good.
Okay, I was trying to save all this till later, but it seems like everyone has questions.
Yeah, no, go for it.
So I'm going to join the crowd. We go back to the food truck slide.
Yeah.
I have a question about this part of your slide where it says that, back one more.
The food truck.
One more. Okay, so up there, we'll say in a moment. Up,
Before.
back one more.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Second point, purchase of a vehicle program funds is not allowable. I have a question about that because we have used Dallas ISD. We have our own warehouse. We do our own distribution.
Right.
We have our own in-house technology team, equipment repair team.
Right.
We use program funds all the time.
But you're using the indirect cost. You're using the indirect cost because it's not directly charged to the child nutrition funds. Because if you are, you would be sending a CR, and if you're not, I don't know. but if your school funding those activities, I would assume very possible that they're using the indirect cost because the indirect cost is a large amount too. So they can't do anything with this indirect cost that they normally cannot directly charge it to the food and nutrition funds, the 240.
Okay, so we can put through indirect costs. We can purchase.
Yes, my understanding is yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
that was my question.
because the indirect cost also supports your executive management because there is a lot of cost that incur for the school operating the food and nutrition program. And we do the same thing in our end when we charge indirect costs to certain federal grants. So it works the same way.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then,
You mind if I
Go ahead.
add to that? So when we're talking about an indirect cost, there's certain things that you want to ensure. Utilize USDA's indirect cost guide because it'll help you determine what costs should be indirectly
Right.
served. And so when we talk about food trucks, food trucks are one of those items that when we're talking about this and you're paying with it from the CN fund, and you'll see it in section 16, requires TDA approval. So
Right.
that's a given. Otherwise, it will be considered unallowable costs. And again, we want to make sure you keep your money. So we want to make sure that was procured correctly. And so if that is something that you're planning to do, ensure that we have the request and that it is approvable.
Right.
Okay.
So we're running out of time, so I'm going to go a little bit faster.
Is that allowable expense?
Refrigerated vehicles, yeah, those that are now allowable expense. We're only talking solely about the food trucks. Yes, only food trucks. Different vehicles for food distribution, equipment distribution, those are allowable, yes. Yeah,
And let's be very clear when we talk about any of these items, we want to make sure they're allowable, reasonable,
and allocable.
allocable, and necessary. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're saying a vehicle is being purchased for transport of food and meals, absolutely, it's benefiting the CN fund. So those are allowable, and of course, you have to ensure you get approval for
You
it.
have to get approval for those, but
one more thing, really quick.
okay.
On the capital equipment request, we always go round and round with you guys, and it's a pain, I think, for us and for you. So I'd just like to say this.
Yes.
We have our own in-house repair team, and we purchase like 10 steamers at once. We may not have a specific location at the start of the year for that, but we want to purchase them.
You're being bursting out of stock, basically.
Correct. So that we
Just
have
tell us
stock.
that. So tell us that we'll approve it for you.
Yeah, we do, but it's a big back and forth, and it might be easier if there were on that drop-down menu, if there were an option to say this is going into stock
Right.
for your repairs and future problems.
So
That's a suggestion.
we're replacing the system next, like we're already on an implementation for a new system, because if we added anything to the existing system, that's an enhancement and it costs us a lot of money.
Yeah.
But with the new system, we're gonna have much more sophisticated one. But always put in the justification. That's why we're buying them, because the analyst that looking at it like, why you're buying 7 steamers and you're not going them anywhere with it? What are you gonna do with it?
I know.
So,
ends up being
and
back
again,
forth
just
with, yeah.
we have turnover in our staff too. So sometimes they're not as knowledgeable, but they always come back to me when they have an issue with something and they work with them. It's easier for us to pick up the phone and say like, hi, you send that request. There is no sites. What's going on with it? And once we get the answer, we'll approve it. So.
I think something else, I don't know, what Michael said too, is, inflation, school a little bit of inflation, but it really has not. So, you could look at January 1st, a lot of people.
Right.
District in Dallas, purchasing that sooner than later. So, a lot of
Right. And we do like
Good point.
try to keep the approval for the CRs within 5 days, because trust me, we get a lot. So
I hate to cut you guys
Yes.
off. Those were great questions, but thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, they can email you
Yep.
guys.
Absolutely.
right,
Okay.
yep,
Is there, yeah.
sure, yeah, we'll send it. And the question that on the PowerPoint that
Is
it's
that the
because
last
it's just
slide?
a question, I'll send you answers for it as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you both.
Oh, I didn't have that.
You guys, if y'all have not signed in when you go in, please do so we can get you the information that you might want from this session right here. Again, thank you all. The questions were great. I could go on and on all day. So we appreciate you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day. Thank you.